Good morning, everybody who's watching, who's with us this morning. We are having today at Salux a webinar, the EU Corona Budget, an emotional moment for the EU. And we thank everybody who's contributed to this webinar and who is we will contribute today, especially Mr. Rosen Ivanov, the European Central Bank. Rosen, you can now first switch off your camera first, and thank you. What we will do today? First, why? The EU Corona budget will be discussed in the European Council this week. And it is obvious that a lot is at stake for Europe, and a lot of emotions are involved, both in Northern Europe and in Southern Europe and in other parts of Europe, Central Europe as well. It is clear that there is a big debate on what is European solidarity? What does it mean? How much can it take? Is there a solution to get out of this? So what we did is not just have a presentation on what is the technical content of what the European Commission proposed to revive the European economy after the Corona crisis. It is also important, we thought, to look to what people are saying, what people are thinking, where the emotions are around this issue, and to combine this in one webinar. And this is not the end of this discussion. We have some voices that will be presented here today, and we will continue that discussion. This webinar builds on the previous webinar we organized on the markets and economies after the Corona crisis and what it means for how we should reform our economy. This builds on that, and one of the speakers, Rosen Ivanov of the previous webinar, is now speaking also here today. And again, the emphasis will be on where are the common people, not simply the institutions or the countries, but what does it mean for you, for me, and everybody else you meet on the street, your friends, your family, your business? What does it mean for that? What does it mean for our environment? So these are the questions that we try to focus on. What are the emotions? What does it mean? And is there a solution? So what is the agenda of today? We will continue. The agenda is that after this short introduction, we will have a summary of voices, and that is also to be read on our website of Salux in more in-depth and wider, coming from Valentina Robinalti from Italy, director of Fondatio Magna Carta, from Tapio Luoma Aho from Finland, who's the director of Compassi, and from Sofia Papadopoulou, Bachelor in Theology and Master in Ecumenical Theology, both in the Aristotle University of Thessalonica, and they are contributing to what is happening, what people are feeling, and they are giving voice to that. And then we will have a great presentation from Rosen Ivanov, and after that, questions, answers, and closing. Now, what we didn't do is to have very long webinar. So we asked these three people to give their excellent thoughts as they present to us on the situation between the EU and the member states and the solidarity between the member states, and how it feels from their perspective, from their country. And we hope that in time to come, more voices will be added to this. So what we will do now, we will simply go through these voices in a very summary way, And then we will give the floor to Mr. Rosen Ivanov. And we thank Valentina Tapio and Sofia for their excellent contributions. And starting with Italy, well, as Mrs. Robinalti expresses, the corona crisis has hit Italy extremely hard, and we are aware of this. And she also states that sharing with Greece, the country where healthcare has been hit in the strongest terms, and therefore, she simply says, look, we cannot get out of this if we don't get liquidity needed. And since weeks, the debate on national and international press on the conditions applied to the EU emergency plan is fiery in Italy and elsewhere. And despite that, we have no certainty. There are no certain rules on some basic questions yet. How the severe conditions imposed by Article 136 of the Treaty on Functioning of the European Union can be derogated without approving a formal amendment to the same treaty. How informal declarations emerging from the Eurogroup meeting can have the same legal value as the European Pillar Treaty. How can we exclude that the acceptance of the ESM financing, 37 billion of euro, would not implicate a future request of conditional financial assistance from the EU and the post-application of a macroeconomic adjustment program in the midterm? This is about these conditions that some countries are asking that should be applied before countries in need receive the money. In the EU and all the member states will pay, if the EU and all the member states will pay respectively, despite the fact that the worst, and her opinion, the worst government of the Republican history is currently in charge, but she refers to the people, a good deal for each counterpart is reachable. If members keep pointing the finger at the Italians, blaming them to waste others' money, or even worse, to steal EU money for feeding the mafia, there are no questions to be answered and no debate to start. So do we start from the need or from the prejudice? If we start from the prejudice, she closes, the latter is the fastest way to destroy the EU and its founding fathers' glorious history. Now from Finland, we received a different voice in a sense. And Mr. Tapio starts to say, forgive our debts and deliver us from the EU. That's of course meant as a provocative statement intended to invoke some debate. And he says that I could not have intended this prayer if I had not heard it once. So he's repeating as a quote, is personal freedom possible if we are bonded by a sense of guilt or debt? Is national freedom possible with the current rising levels of debt and disunity? Issues related to money and debt are threatening to throw the European nations apart. Once again, actually closing with the same point as Mrs. Robinalti said, are we choosing for the European unity or not? But to whom in the end are we indebted to? So who will pay? And what should we do about this all? Is there a way out, a forgiveness of debt, a European jubilee? And this also refers to our previous webinar. A lot has happened in terms of European integration, and he mentions a lot of European policies. But then he asks, how we then feel more united because of all these European policies? And he is not convinced. Is there a European vision that we feel as ours? Do we feel European? And what then does it mean? Do we even think about the EU that much? Good question. Maybe. We are mostly indifferent of the musings of the distant Euro visionaries who seem to live in another planet, but not in any particular nation. Europe is far from Paris, far from Rome, far from Helsinki, isn't it? He states. We average citizens do not have the resource to keep track on what's going on and what it will mean for us, our lives, our taxes, our salaries, and so on. So a lot is at stake, but do we feel Europeans? That is actually the core question he is asking. And he boils it down to a relational problem. Do we feel related with each other? It is difficult to do solidarity if we do not feel related, if we do not feel real solidarity in the first place. And the media isn't helping either, he states. And that is actually dividing us. The economic relationships, therefore all relations between EU countries, are damaged by debt. The currency union has made the debt problems more relational, but we don't feel more relational towards each other as nations in between each other. Could we forgive the debts with some of the many mechanisms that have been proposed? Who could be bailed out and who would be bailed in? And then he says, in a positive tone, so to say, my respect to those who have to sit on the table trying to figure that out. Well, we share that feeling with Tapio for sure. And then we come to the contribution of Mrs. Sofia Papadopoulou from Greece. And she says that my country, Greece, has suffered unparalleled economic disaster for most of the last decade. So this isn't a new experience there. An economic crisis that has hit younger Greeks hard. And as a result, young Greek adults like myself feel it's the stark choice. Leave the country or face a lifetime of unemployment. Unemployment is in Greece is a record high. And she actually points to something that everybody in Europe should be aware of. If we basically don't help Southern Europe, the peoples, especially young people from Southern Europe, will have no other choice than to migrate to Northern Europe. Now that is as such not a problem, but will everybody in Northern Europe welcome that, and is it indeed a feasible solution? Isn't it better to find solidarity? But then, of course, how? And then she says, as we are approaching the debate on the EU budget and the Corona budget, as a young Greek citizen, in times of Corona crisis, she calls on European leaders to start seeing the human behind the numbers. So we are back to the core notions of human dignity. Young people from the Mediterranean countries, along with the other young European citizens, deserve all possible opportunities to develop our full potential, to shape the future of the EU and to thrive in it. We face an extremely difficult start in the labor market. This is emphasized by this pandemic. Member states need to prioritize investments that can help young people in the short and medium term. And I know Rosen Ivanov will emphasize that as well. We deserve opportunities and we have to be in the center of the recovery plan. Well, that is a truth without further debate. The Corona crisis can be that wake-up call for European leaders to intensify cooperation and a stark reminder that they do not adopt resolutions for the debt of the poorest European countries. It would be hypocritical to keep talking about European solidarity. In this debate, they have to make sure that the voice of the young people of every European country are heard. The right decisions from the European leaders can offer hope that we can make it through this crisis and anything else we will face. So it is clear that when we're talking about this Corona crisis, we are really facing an existential situation for the EU. we listen to these voices from the various member states, and we will add more on our SALOC's website. It is clear that this is a call for reflection, but also a call for action. Now, when it comes to action, then in all three voices, we hear a call for solutions. Now, Mr. Rosen Ivanov will not only present some and explain some of the issues at stake, but also present one of the possible ways to move further. Rosen Ivanov, and I invite him already to go on screen and to put on his mic, and I thank you, Rosen, for being with us today and to share your vast experience with European finance and at the public level, European public finance with us, and it's an honor and really something great for us that you are here with us today, and I thank you for that. Rosen was born in Bulgaria, so we have a voice from Central Europe, and a very strong one, I would say, where we graduated magna cum laude from the prestigious master's program in international economic relations. Well, that is all that's at stake now. Of the University for National and World Economy at Sofia, Bulgaria. And then, well, I would almost say, obviously, he worked for more than 9 years, at least 3 in a managerial capacity at the Bulgarian National Bank on subjects related to securities, payment, settlement systems, regulation, EU integration, statistics, government debt, and other central banking topics. So you had the whole, everything on your plate there. Yeah. He then went on to work for 9 years as a senior expert at the European Central Bank in Frankfurt, in Main, in Germany, on similar issues. He has presented viable solutions at international fora for resolving some of the major macroeconomic challenges for our day. He is currently the director of the Center for Fair Economics and Finance at the Heidelberg Institute for International Studies and Leadership. So we are very pleased and really grateful to have you here today, and we thank you for presenting your presentation here with us. I will now
thank you very much, Johannes. Thank you very much for the general introduction.
Yeah, I will stop my share so that is fixed, and then you can continue with your share for everybody watching. Rosen will present his vision, his points, and then he will be available to answer some questions. So I will click out, and Rosen will start.
Okay, so does it work? Do you see it? Okay, thank you very much first, Johannes, for your general introduction. Just to clarify, I'm not currently an employee of the European Central Bank. I have been working, I'm just the director of the Center for Fair Economics and Finance. So what I'm going to present to you is the policy response to the corona pandemic, what has been agreed already, what is planned, and how can we improve it potentially. A number of disclaimers would apply here. This is first my personal opinion, and it is meant as a constructive input into the EU-wide debate, and it's not meant as an attack on individuals, institutions, or countries. Somehow it's not working. Okay, goes on auto. The presentation is made to facilitate discussion for a wider audience, so this is using less technical language. I start first with the policy response of EU institutions and individual countries. And then I will discuss the extra EU Corona budget proposal and its financing. And then I'll present an alternative proposal to address the economic challenges presented by the Corona pandemic. So first, when the crisis started, basically this coronavirus crisis was induced by this virus, but it was realized at the beginning that this is going to be a big crisis, and therefore the EU finance ministers already in March agreed that the suspension of the Stability and Growth Pact fiscal rules is to be considered feasible, because there's the conditions for the general escape clause of this fiscal framework are fulfilled, i.e. there is a severe economic downturn in the euro area or even the European Union as a whole. That allows for a greater flexibility of member states to take all the necessary measures to support health, civil protection systems and economies through discretionary stimuli and also through coordinated actions. However, this has to be done for a certain time. It should be temporary and should be targeted. Anyway, the idea is basically this allows for coordinated measures to tackle the economic consequences of the pandemic while departing from the budgetary requirements, i.e. the budget balance and the lowering of the debt to GDP ratio that would normally apply. So we are in that mode now. And in that mode, the European Council has agreed initially on a 540 billion euro response. Up to 100 billion is to be deployed in loans to EU governments to tackle unemployment issues or short-term employment, but that will be activated only when a requisite 25 billion of state guarantees are provided by the individual countries. Also, another 200 billion are deployed in loans from the European Investment Bank to existing struggling but viable companies. Most of them are small and medium enterprises. So, but again, there is a need for, prior to launching this, there is a need for the countries to provide state guarantees to the amount of 25 billion. And finally, it's the 240 billion in loans from the European stability mechanisms to euro area governments up to 2% of their GDP to cover the healthcare costs due to the pandemic. And here there are no guarantees to be provided, but however, some conditions may apply. For the moment, all countries are considered to fulfill these conditions, but again, it's not sure whether in the medium term that would not lead to some problems for some countries. The response of the European Central Bank has been also very forceful. As you know already, there is the asset purchase program where in September 2019 it was agreed for the ECB to buy securities at a rate of 240 billion per year. So that would mean this would be the amount to be bought anyway this year. And then in March, when the crisis came, there was an agreement on an additional asset purchase program envelope of 120 billion euro till the end this year end. However, it was soon realized that this would not be enough, and then the ECB came with the so-called pandemic emergency purchase program, initially agreeing on a 750 billion euro. So how this program is different from the APP is that actually it includes Greece. Greece was not included in the previous program, but now it includes Greece. So that's a good thing, I believe. And then also it is more flexible. So while the APP has to follow exactly the capital key of the, i.e. the share of each euro area country in the ECB capital, and this has to be done in proportion to the share, the pandemic emergency purchase program can deviate temporarily from this share. You will see later how this has happened already. Sorry, there's some problem here with the slides. So another thing that the ECB decided was to ease the macroprudential requirement to enable bank lending, to make it easier basically for banks to lend to embattled, to release more of their capital so that they're better able to lend to households and corporations. Then in June 2020, the ECB agreed on an additional envelope of 600 billion euro till July 2021 for the pandemic emergency purchase program. And then again in June, it did an auction for 1.3 billion targeted longer-term bank refinancing for 3 years. So basically 800 billion of that was refinancing of old longer-term refinancing, and 500 billion euro is actually the net increase in bank refinancing. However, there are potential problems with ECB corona response, I would say. First of all, the European banks have not been tested for such an extreme economic downturn. I mean, normally everybody is saying, okay, they're in good shape, but it may be that there would be higher credit losses than initially thought, because I think such a big downturn in GDP was not considered. Again, the longer-term bank refinancing was granted at a negative rate. So this 1.3 trillion was actually granted at a -1% in the first year, which is like a subsidy of 13 billion for the banks, basically, which I think is a huge subsidy. I understand, of course, the policy dimension. It's good that the banks are well capitalized and have longer-term financing, but again, it raises some issues, I would say, for fairness. So another thing is the limitation of the public sector purchase program. Only up to 33% of national debt can be bought, or 50% of supranational debt. So more indebted countries will not hit this limit at some point, while lower indebted countries probably will become ineligible to participate in this public sector purchase program. So I think this is also kind of unfair. Yeah, I mean, it's problematic for me. I think there was the final problem that countries with greater issuance of eligible corporate or bank bonds will benefit more from the APP, because the APP actually is a program where 20% of the securities which are bought are private or bank, basically private corporate or bank bonds. So and the bonds markets in the more developed countries are better developed, so they have more bonds, so there are more bonds eligible to be bought from the developed countries, while, for example, from smaller countries, because I think there is also a minimum for the issuance, and thus it's the developed countries which are usually benefiting more compared to the less developed countries in the EU. So if we look at the breakdown of the public sector, the securities bought from the public sector under the pandemic emergency purchase program, you could see these are substantial amounts. These are in millions. So, but as you can see, for example, for Italy, it shows that in this period, this initial period, the ECB has bought 37 billion of bonds, while normally they should have bought only 29 billion of Italian public debt. So this flexibility, which I explained earlier, was used basically to support the Italian government during this difficult time. Again, 73 billion of corporate and bank bonds have been bought, and mostly those are from bigger issuers from more developed countries. Again, are these the entities which need the most help? I doubt that. So in total, already 366 billion has been bought under the pandemic emergency purchase program as of 3rd of July. So 20%, as I mentioned, are not public security. So it's a strong response from DCB, but is it well targeted? Is it democratic? Is it transparent? Well, they try to do their best to be fair and so on to them. But again, this is probably not a very sharp tool how to address the pandemic emergency response. So other potential problem with ECB's corona response is already the accumulated debt, public debt mostly, is almost 3 trillion. And one can even argue that additional government debt issued by Euro area countries since the Great Recession has been bought by the ECB. So it's kind of already, as you know, the discussions also with the German Constitutional Court decision. Is it not actually this hidden monetary financing, which is strictly prohibited by the treaty, what it is? So you see this article where there is this prohibition of monetary finance of directly from the ECB to public entities or even union institutions. When you consider the fiscal response of individual EU countries, there are 3 types of responses: immediate fiscal impulse, that means additional government spending or foregone revenues, and this would lead to deterioration of the budget balance. This is one type of fiscal response. Another type would be a deferral of certain payments, which normally should be just improving the liquidity of individuals and companies, but does not cancel their obligations. Then there is the third type of response where other liquidity provisions and guarantees are provided in terms of usually guarantees for credit lines and so on, which may be the so-called contingent liabilities, which might turn into actual expenses either this year or later. So when you consider the size of each of these responses by individual countries, you would notice usually that the more frugal countries prior to the crisis, they had a bigger response. Like Germany, for example, is to be noted, and Netherlands also has significant, Denmark has a significant response, and rightly so, because they have been more frugal. But actually, when you see also Italy has quite a big response, in particular in terms of deferral or other liquidity guarantees, because I think also the ECB has provided enough flexibility for individual governments to do it. Again, as you see, this would worsen the public debt in the end. So is this a good solution? It's very heterogeneous. I mean, different countries have done different things more. So it's a question mark again. There is not so much coordination. Again, this I think can be improved. So the assessment would be overall of this fiscal response. Okay, this is heterogeneous of different countries in terms of type and the size of measures used. It's a different initial position that each country has, but the ECB has provided additional flexibility to Euro area countries, and there is a lack of coordination. For example, what they have done so far, and then what they want from the EU Corona budget, that would be certainly a source of strife, because certain countries have done certain things which may be better, let's say, and then everybody would basically want to get more from the common pie and more from their own pie, let's say. So overall, the corona crisis has been treated as a temporary problem and treated by injecting of liquidity for governments, companies, and individuals. there are numerous distributional and fairness problems with the corona response at each level, EU, national, regional, individual. I mentioned some of that. And then the corona response as it is now will lead to permanent rise in EU government, corporate and individual indebtedness. That's how it looks like. That's what it is at the moment. But is there additional, how can we do any better by an additional EU package? How can we resolve this? I think I have some proposal there. First, let's discuss the extra corona budget. So the proposal of the Commission is for 750 billion euros. Out of it, 2/3 would be in grants, and it would be on top of the 1.1 trillion budget, multi-annual budget of the EU. So this would not be for a year, it would be for a couple of years. It will be distributed in a couple of years. Most of it would be in grants and loans to governments for for recovery and resilience of national economies, with a focus on the green and digital transformation. There will be also some grants to municipalities, hospitals, and companies which have been more directly affected by the pandemic. Also, 40 billion have been dedicated to support transition to climate neutrality. 15 billion for the European Agricultural Fund for Rural Development, and 61 billion to European Investment Bank or to the member states promotional banks for guarantees for loans for mostly small and medium enterprises, and some funds for health preparedness and civil protection, very few actually. So how would this financing of the corona budget is going to be done? The current proposal envisages that the EU Commission is to borrow on the international markets 750 billion, which are to be paid out of the EU budget. Issuing of common bonds has been dismissed at this point. Now, it's going to be distributed more on a needs basis, but it's controversial that 2/3 will take the form of grants, because of course that the governments which will be paying will get less. Actually, it will result in a transfer from the richer countries to those who have greater need. So normally fiscally responsible governments feel that this is unfair, as they saved more in previous years. And there are still disagreements how to distribute these funds. What kind of conditions, such as rule of law, money against reforms, some percentage dedicated for climate neutrality, lowering of the overall EU budget, and so that this is going to be accepted, some rebates for countries who are contributing more. So these are kind of the problems and the disagreements which the countries are to resolve ideally this week. And I would think that this will likely result in some usual complex EU compromise. How to do this? It's to be noted that there is willingness of richer countries to show more solidarity, but of course all countries have their own ideas how to do it and against what conditions. What is not really mentioned, I believe, is that most likely 50% of these EU bonds will be eventually bought by the ECB under the public sector purchase program or the pandemic emergency purchase program. And again, this raises the issues of whether it's not actually a hidden monetary financing. So this is something that again raises this flag. So overall, it's not very clear how big of a transfer of funds from the more fiscally responsible to less so EU countries will happen, what kind of conditions will be there, and who will actually be the final recipients, because countries will receive it, municipalities, but how it will be distributed, it's really not clear. in any case, what is clear is there would be a high EU and public debt. That's a definite result. Can we do it better? This is an alternative proposal I want to present. First, why is the corona crisis so severe in the EU? I would argue that when the central bank is prohibited from providing credit to the government, such as the euro area, money creation is only debt-based. So money supply increases when the credit increases. So first you have to increase credit so that the money in an economy increases. There is no other way. When you prohibit the central bank from providing directly credit to the government, that's the outcome. So a normal economy would need for money supply to increase, so that there is more money in the economy. But the mechanism, the only mechanism so far is that it's going to be done only by increasing of debt. So there is a huge buildup of public and private debt in the euro area. And I would say that the corona pandemic is actually served as a trigger for a full-blown financial crisis of an already over-leveraged economy. And this has not been felt so much because the initial response was very, very quick considered with the previous crisis. So this financial crisis has been put under the carpet, so to say. Enough liquidity has been provided at each level by the ECB and governments. But if this disruption continues, these liquidity problems will transform into insolvency problems, because debt has increased, GDP has decreased, so the burden of debt has increased. Also, things to keep in mind for a potential solution. A study of IMF staff has showed that euro area economies with higher private debt of households and or corporations always have lower future growth. At the same study, it was shown that euro area economies with higher public but lower private debt did not experience lower growth. Again, the corona pandemic will depress private credit, but that will also depress GDP. So it will increase the burden of private credit in some way. But lowering private credit will lead to a reduction of the money supply that will hamper the recovery and lead to deflation. So this is a kind of a vicious circle when you take the last two statements, basically, which is there. So something needs to be done about this. First, what needs to be done? I believe we have to be clear. We have to address first the pandemic challenges as they are. We have to preserve the potential of the EU economies and enhance their productivity. And we have to reduce the debt buildup with a focus on private debt, and do not make certain EU countries bear the cost. It seems like a magic if there is such a solution, but I will dare to present one. First, what are the pandemic challenges? What are the challenges we need to address? It's obvious for me that we need to provide better treatments and prophylaxis against the COVID in each countries, or in all countries, the best as possible for all EU citizens. We have to also build emergency supplies because we had the situation of lockdowns. We don't know whether this will not happen again. So it's better that we have medical supplies, ideally from EU producers, food supplies, more food supplies by EU farmers, water and energy securities. So this is ensured. And also opening up of kindergartens and schools has to be very cautious, possibly home-based for small children. There are some ways of taking care for children, which is called like daily mother. Some in Germany, where we had it before, like in the previous crisis, where a mother of children takes 2 or 3 other children. So I thought that worked really well, and this could really work very, very well also if in an ongoing situation, in an ongoing corona crisis. Also, we have to think of safer alternatives for all to to study or work either online or in smaller groups. So these are measures that are, for me, something that the EU can support in each country. Also, what needs to be done at preserve the economy's potential and enhance productivity. For me, this is important to subsidize online or small group study or training initiatives, because we know that education is inexorably linked to productivity. So the higher education, the more productive the economies are. And the crisis shouldn't be a problem, shouldn't be a hindrance for the youth to continue their study, to continue their training. And actually, the European Council even has adopted so-called youth guarantee already in 2011, but it was not fully realized due to lack of funds and the Stability of Growth Pact, because some countries thought that if they committed the necessary funds, they would overstep their budget target. Even if there is the agency Eurofund estimated that this youth guarantee would pay for itself. So this is something that already has been agreed by the European Parliament. Again, another measure, the so-called transitional job offer, has been also endorsed by the European Parliament. And in this actually, under this initiative, temporary jobs at a minimum salary can be provided for the unemployed in the healthcare, childcare, social care, environmental care, or other public or community services. So, because unemployed, with every day the unemployed are not doing anything, what they could have contributed is lost forever. The real potential of the economies is only realized when at least when everybody is working, when everybody is materially contributing to the economy. I think these measures of engaging the unemployed and helping everybody who wants to study and to retrain, these are the essential responses that the EU has to provide for all of their citizens. And of course, it will be disproportionate in different countries, but everybody should have a chance to contribute somehow or to improve their subsidies without getting anything. We could pay for countries to provide valuable products and services, especially those with limited EU supplies. Also, financing, we can finance EU green infrastructure projects. For example, we could extend the high-speed train network between biggest EU cities, for example, mostly to include Eastern and Central European countries, where I think will be a better alternative compared to air travel. So, or support more research into harnessing alternative energies like nuclear fusion, which already the EU is supporting. But if there is a big breakthrough, it's totally different from nuclear fission. It's by design. Nuclear fusion is actually it's absolutely safe. It shouldn't scare us that it's nuclear. And also we could finance central bankers support monetary financing as a viable option to intervene in the event of a severe crisis. And it does not need to cause inflation. Money supply, for example, on the money supply front, private credit will decrease in this crisis because people don't want to take additional credit, even though the institutions are trying to force them so that the money supply does not decrease. But actually, if we increase the money supply by other measures, by monetary financing, we may allow for private credit to decrease or for the people to deleverage, to lower their loans. On the other front, if we use this money for these things, which I mentioned above, basically to have to produce, to supply new products and services, and also to hire the unemployed, to enhance human capital, and also to improve the infrastructure, there should be such a cause for inflation. But even if inflation still increases, we can further reduce private credit so that the money supplies decreases. So for me, monetary financing is a viable option, especially in this crisis, is a viable option to intervene. However, we know that for that we would need a change, the so-called in Article 123, where which I mentioned, which prohibits monetary financing, and we can insert this paragraph where in severe economic shocks, the ECB is to buy EU bonds in an amount and under conditions agreed by unanimity of EU countries. So it's a democratic approach where all countries have to agree to do it. And of course, they have to agree how to share it. So they would never agree unless everybody agrees. And I think this is a really democratic approach. So, for example, based on a unanimous decision of EU governments, the EU may issue 10-year zero-coupon Corona Solidarity Bond of 1 trillion nominal value, which is to be bought by the ECB. And then the ECB actually can reduce its various programs by 1 trillion, because if you saw the response of the ECB is almost like 2 trillion. So reducing that by 1 trillion and distributing that 1 trillion via the ECB, via the EU government structures, and I think it's a more democratic approach. And then in 10 years, this Corona Solidarity Bond can be redeemed by an accounting operation by netting the obligation of EU countries under this bond with their future profit from the ECB as a result of paying the bond. So there is no risk of loss for anyone. The conclusion that I have is that the current reaction to the Corona post crisis is heterogeneous and problematic on multiple levels. Different EU countries provide different amount and type of stimuli leading to increase of debt. And the monetary policy of the ECB subsidizes private banks and creditors, disproportionately benefits richer countries, and may amount to covert monetary financing. So instead of this, common currency, because the euro is a common currency, can be used in a much more transparent and democratic way without the need to increase private and public indebtedness. And that is my presentation. Here I finish my presentation. I'm, of course, open to questions and any ideas you may have on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rosen, for your thorough presentation and your hard work that you have put in making this. And regardless the number of people watching now or questions or whatever, we will make sure that policymakers in touch with SALOX and the European Christian Political Movement will receive this presentation, because I think that a lot of members of parliament or members of European Parliament would be served by this comprehensive information. Now, I don't have any questions and answers yet, or any questions yet, and the answers will be provided, of course. I only got one question in I think what it was a Latin, so that is a bit difficult for me to, and was sounded more like a remark, which Timeo danaos dona ferentes. Now, well, my Latin, that was a long time ago, I'm afraid. What you suggest is first of all, what you line out is the same. Well, actually, what you're saying is the feelings from both Greece, Italy, on the one hand, and Finland, as on the other hand, as we pointed out in our voices, and they have all a point. Because what you're saying is there is a lack of democracy, transparency. There is the danger of transfer from rich to rich north to poor south. But then, obviously, if we look only to it like that, we forget how the money is actually spent so far, which seems actually to favor richer countries in a way, but also is disproportionately located towards institutions, towards the financial institutions, and is not reaching people, not sufficiently in any case. And this is true for both the EU and the ECB response. Is this a correct summary of what you said?
I would say so, because it's the thing is, it's no blame for the ECB. There is no blame for governments. I mean, it's in the treaties. It's what they do. It's they have to do it. I don't believe they are intentional in this result is intentional on their side. I mean, just to be clear, yeah, it's not like we're not talking about some conspiracy and so on. It's a fact of life, yeah. It's this is how it all what it amounts to. Because I believe, of course, in some richer countries, the people are much better supported. Like Germany is very generous with the citizens, with the small businesses, and so on. But again, are we not supposed actually to help the people? Like, instead of helping the institutions, and this amounts also to kind of bailing out shareholders, bailing out creditors, are we not supposed actually to bail out the people? And then if these, let's say, shareholders, in their pursuit of higher profit, have over-leveraged, shouldn't we allow them to default? Like, okay, this is a normal difficulty. Like, it's not normal, let's say, but they should have some reserves. They should have some alternatives, and they should bear some of the cost. And instead, it's the little people who are appearing to bear the cost, or also creditors who maybe they have given credits to not viable companies and so on. So, are we not supposed to allow them for the normal market forces to go on, while supporting really the young people especially, and those who are unemployed? Because for me, unemployment is a big problem. Unemployment, and especially among young people, it is a very big problem. Because if you think about it, if today there would be, I don't know, it's a big number of people who are unemployed. And today, if they don't produce something, they need to get something from the economy for their living, but they don't have the opportunity to contribute because there are not open positions and so on. So for me, using this money from the ECB to employ, to engage people, especially young people, to provide them opportunities of study, or to provide the unemployed for some even short-term work opportunities, even at a minimum salary, we would be much better off compared to bailing out, let's say, big corporations or banks.
I have, thank you. I think that is very clear, and it's very much in line with our previous webinar that emphasized exactly the same point of what should happen. Now, I see two questions here. First of all, there's somebody who kindly translated the sentence "Timeo danaus et dona ferentes." He said it's a Latin phrase from Aeneid, from Virgil, and it has been paraphrased in English as the proverb, "Beware of Greeks bearing gifts." Its literal meaning is, I fear the Danaans, Greeks, even those bearing gifts, or even when they bear gifts. Now, I don't know who is bearing gifts to whom here, but anyway, we have the translation. But we have a very clear question from Tapua Luama Au, also contributed to the Voices, who wrote a response from the Finnish perspective. And he's asking you, how would you compare the financial crisis response of the EU and the USA and or ECB versus Fed? So basically the USA slash Fed one hand and EU ECB on the other hand. How would you compare these two?
Well, they're very similar. So, for example, the financial, as regarding the financial institutions, both the Fed and the ECB, they reacted in a similar fashion, basically supporting the liquidity of the markets, of the financial markets. So that was really good that this time they were really forceful responses to preserve, let's say, the financial stability as a whole of the system. We had a turmoil, let's say, the first month, but after that there was enough of a response, at least to stabilize the financial markets. So not really a big difference there, I would say. What is different is that the Fed directly can support the US government. That's very obvious. Like they don't need the Fed can just support the printing of money of the US government. Actually, in the US, it's the Congress which decides to spend certain amount of money, 1 trillion, 2 trillions, and so on, and the Fed has to provide the money. Basically, that's how it is. Like it's a bit more technical, but they are more or less obliged to provide the money. They don't have the option like the ECB. Okay, with the ECB, but the ECB has a different mandate. The mandate of the ECB is not the solvency of the countries. The mandate of the ECB is not to cover the expenses of the EU as it is now. So it's like it's a very different setup, and that limits the response of the ECB. So
and there is your. Basically, there we enter your solution. Huh? You basically say, now correct me where I'm wrong, because I am not an expert, not even close to the level of expertise you are. So I am this common European who tries to understand what you wrote and what you presented. So basically, if I'm getting it right, but correct me where I'm wrong, it is like this, that the EU governments unanimously say we allow the ECB in case of severe crisis, like this one, which is obvious, to issue a bond to the EU member states.
Yeah, to the EU, to the budget of the EU, let's say.
To the EU. Not to the EU member states. It's
to the EU. Yeah, let's say.
Okay. So then, but then with the assumption that it will go to the member states, obviously, because of course, not saying the EU is the common of member states. Yeah, and then we would be able to do these things, as you pointed out. Supporting the unemployed young people, as Sofia Papadopoulou emphasized, for example, in her contribution, to green the economy. We would be able to provide a solidarity, as Mrs. Valentina Rovinalti asked for, and we would not support, the shareholders, but the people, as you pointed out. Now, I have some questions on that, because, okay, that's the solution you propose. Now, obviously, when I'm a Northern European, and I happen to be a Northern European, I'm from the Netherlands, so I can hear and feel and sense what would automatically come up here. And that would be something in the sphere like this. Like, there are two questions there. So first of all, would that not be the same thing as Eurobonds, which people really don't like here, because, and that is the thought behind that, it would lead to a kind of United States of Europe, and would it do that? So there's two very important questions. And the third question is actually connected to that. All of that is basically, would it be possible to say, okay, we issue the ECB issues such a bond, but only if we are certain that it is not going to the shareholders again.
Mhm.
So could it be possible to attach these kind of conditions? Of course, when it is unanimously and it's made a political decision, you know, I mean, it would be easier for politicians to say, well, let's listen to the electorate instead of the shareholders, I would think. But so it would be politically viable, would be technically possible. But again, would it lead to Eurobonds? Would it lead to a United States of Europe? Why yes, why no?
Okay, so the Eurobonds, as they were discussed, because Eurobonds is can mean very different things, but we are talking about Eurobonds in the sense of bonds which are commonly guaranteed by all countries. So it means that if a country does not pay, the others have to cover what it did not pay. So basically, what is at issue here is the potential risk of loss for some of the countries. Let's say if a country A does not pay, all the others have to pay for its share when it needs to be redeemed. So how my approach is different is actually that at the redemption, it will be just a technical operation and there will be no risk of loss. So basically all the countries, when this type of bond which I'm proposing is going to be redeemed, it's actually at the redemption date, let's say in 10 years from now, basically the obligation of each EU countries under this bond would be netted with the potential profit it will receive from the ECB, because the ECB will receive the proceeds of this bond from the EU governments, and then it has to distribute it to Euro area governments. But let's say we can make this solidarity bond so that the profit can be distributed to EU government. So you can write anything in under this bond, like the conditions. And in this way, actually, there is no risk of loss. There is no risk of loss for any government. So this is how it is different. And also it is different that you will not take money from the financial markets. So that's instead of going to the financial markets, you create new money which are not credit based. You don't take from the financial market so that you don't burden them, but you take credit free money directly from the ECB.
So it means that your proposal means that we don't take basically we don't issue a bond as EU to the financial markets.
Yes.
It's an ECB, but it is the ECB issuing a bond to the EU.
Yes. So instead of, let's say, ECB is going to buy up to 2 trillion of bonds and also finance banks up to 2 trillion. So instead of the ECB buying these kind of securities, all kinds of securities, for 1 trillion, it could buy this bond. And then it's up to the EU, actually countries, they can also issue it only on the condition exactly beforehand they agree it goes to the EU budget, this multi-annual budget, and then they agree in advance how to spend it. And it doesn't need to burden anyone, basically any country. So basically these are new money coming. And again, I'm arguing that this new money will not cause inflation or hyperinflation, because there is, already the ECB is planning to introduce 2 trillion. So just 1 trillion out of that is going to be distributed by the EU budget, not by the ECB buying securities according to the capital ratio and so on and so on. So I'm not proposing something extreme. I believe it's like, even if it's in the end, this amounts to monetary financing, you could say that at least you see that in our current systems, we have so much debt. It's almost not possible to increase this debt anymore. So it's important to allow for this debt to go down. You have to introduce some kind of new money. So it's either public debt, but in the ECB, in the euro area environment, the ECB is limited to do that. It cannot buy public debt directly. Even the current operations of buying the asset purchase program, even though it has 3 trillion on its balance sheet, it's not supposed to be permanent. But the thing is that we realize now, since this, okay, we wanted to fight inflation, so we wanted to prohibit the central banks from doing it, but there is so much more private debt already on the balance sheets of corporations, on the balance sheet of households, and so on, that actually for this, to allow for this private debt to go down, you have to introduce some kind of new money so that you don't depress the economies. Otherwise, they would be just a downward spiral.
Well, I think that is a very clear answer that basically answers all these questions. When I'm listening to you, and it kind of strikes me that we don't hear this proposal in public sphere. I mean, we are now basically making it public, but we didn't hear it. You don't hear about it in any debate, at least, or perhaps I missed something. I didn't hear it. Why is that? Or am I wrong?
Yeah, no, you're not wrong. You know, the debate, even in the 70s, there was a lot of inflation happening. And this has led to this prohibition of central banks from directly financing governments because of this inflation, high inflation concern. And you know, inflation went under control and so on, but it became a holy cow. This monetary prohibition against monetary financing, or basically for central banks directly to providing money to the governments, this has become a holy cow, which nobody should touch. You know, it was like this should not be considered. But this has led to because the alternative for the money supply, as I mentioned, is to increase private or public debt, and it's like a Ponzi scheme. We need to increase more and more and more private credit. But private credit, you have to pay interest on it. You have to, at some point, you have to return it, or you have to increase it even more and more and more. And that has been the modus operandi, so to say, until the previous crisis, when all this QE started. And you could say that this is a way for the public debt to, by increasing public debt, that allowed private debt to decrease. But this was sold, let's say, as a temporary measure and so on. But we know now that it's just not sustainable. We have too much debt. And for me, it's only now in this crisis where central bankers, ex-central bankers at least, officially are starting to recognize. I attended a seminar in May. They, you know, this modern monetary theory also in the US, where they're saying, okay, we, as long as we have free real resources, like people not working, companies which are not using all of their capacity, money can be created out of nothing. They are created out of nothing these days. But we have to engage by creating this money out of nothing. You do not indebt anyone, basically, but you try to engage real resources, like people working, like that. When this money are used to create something, to engage people, then you don't cause inflation, because against this new money, there are new products, basically. But that, again, it allows for reduction of debt. And for me, it's a much more stable world, and a more stable financial world. But again, nowadays, there is a change in the air, and even mainstream economists are open to these ideas, especially in this kind of crisis that we are having now.
And the problem that we have with the QA and similar solutions, as you pointed out, is that now actually the same thing is happening, but then in an undemocratic, untransparent way, and in such a way that is only benefiting banks and shareholders. And this is, of course, something people really don't like. People really don't want. They want transparency, they want democracy, and they want hope, as Sofia Papadopoulou pointed out in her contribution. People need hope. People need something to look forward to get out of this kind of eternal vicious circle. And obviously this is your idea. I may also need to put some disclaimer here. This is an idea that we as Salox can share, but it doesn't mean that this is automatically an idea that we as Salox endorse. But we will provide it to people to think about it and to respond to it, and to ask others also to respond to it, and see whether this could be a way to get somewhere. As think tank, we are there to induce debate, to create debate, but not only debate for the sake of debate, but also to encourage further thinking and further solutions that are a bit out of the box, if we as Salox are following our mission concretely. Now, at this moment, I don't have new questions coming in, either on my WhatsApp or on Facebook or on the Zoom. So I think that my question now to participants is please ask or be silent in the Zoom forever. And then right up here, somebody is mentioning, coming back to this, and I know this is Tapio Duomo Aho, his favorite subject, and now he's laughing at home, I guess. Thank you for mentioning is modern monetary theory. There's a very interesting discussion and will be more open, especially in the case in case Democrats win the U.S. elections. But the risk of hyperinflation is being discussed. Is it that any realism? I guess that I need I need to say that you basically already kind of answered the question. I guess that this risk of hyperinflation is being discussed. So is it a realistic proposal? I was trying to understand this final sentence of his question. Is it a realistic proposal? Do you think it's a realistic proposal? Or is it kind of idealistic and it's more like, let's think of something out of the box, but actually, no, the situation is bad and will only get worse. And sorry, this is a nice idea, but it won't work in reality because, of other problems that will arise from it.
Well, I think it's a realistic proposal, obviously. I mean, I know that this has been, a taboo, a fantasy, it has been dismissed. But I can give you even a link to a 3-hour discussion by leading economists, including the ex-vice president, Mr. Constanțiu, who are discussing realistically. They agree with most of what the modern monetary theory is saying, and so on. So they are discussing, very serious people. They are very seriously discussing and admitting to a lot of merit to this theory, basically that it is correctly describing the situation that a central bank, a government which has basically an independent central bank, can always pay the bills of the government and so on. But I think it's fully realistic. I mean, why should the ECB create 2 trillion now to insert enough liquidity? Instead, it could create 1 trillion, and this could be better distributed, because that's very realistic. That's what's happening now. So instead of leaving that to the ECB to create 2 trillion, we actually create 1 trillion. And actually it could be less of a hyperinflation risk, because also with what the ECB is doing, there is a higher hyperinflation risk if we let's say the ECB do this. So, but obviously they are doing it. There is no inflation now. And again, it's how money supply in the end works out, because now when people are just selling, paying off their debts, that reduces the money supply. So when the money supply is reduced, actually the countries are going into depression. So you have to increase it a bit, and you can increase it up to a level so that you preserve the previous level of money supply. It can be very precisely managed, and you don't force the private sector to go into credit. And also you have a lot of idle resources. You have a lot of unemployed people. You have a lot of underutilized capacity into companies and so on. So as long as you have underutilized capacity, and of course you're going to pay minimum salaries for these short-term jobs. You're not going to pay huge salaries, but anyway, that would be enough for people. And this, this monster of hyperinflation, this is only when the situation is out of control, and we do it only once. We do it in this situation. We do it unanimously. Everybody would be satisfied that we do it, and we actually be used for something useful. It's not going to be used to increase anyone's salary and so on, but we will create something with this money. And basically that's the guarantee that we will not have hyperinflation. So it's totally realistic. Of course, now that I'm not an official of the ECB or any other institutions, or I am not a government also official and so on, I could say this, and it's logical. I mean, there is no logic against this solution. Actually, I don't find anything against it. But again, because I'm not part of the government structure or super government structure, I could discuss this, I could present it, and also you could see ex-officials who are now openly supporting these ideas. I could send you the link to this 3-hour seminar where they're discussing these things. And
some people might be interested in that, for example, Tapio or others. And if anybody's wanting that, and they can contact us, and we can provide that link to them. So you can send it to me if anybody's interested. He or she can have it. So there's one thing I think that is very important. What you're saying is that it is not meant as a systemic solution.
Mm-hmm.
It is meant as an kind of incidental mm-hmm. solution, as you describe it, in severe symmetric economic shocks. And that is, I think, a very important point that needs to be mentioned here. So you could basically say that it is not a MMT, it's not a modern monetary theory, but it is a moderate modern monetary theory.
Yeah.
So the triple MT, and that is, I think, something that we would need to add here to understand your proposal sufficiently. But one thing I take from here, and that is this, that you are pleading for European solidarity, but then in a deeper sense that we look to the human dignity, to the solidarity between humans rather than between institutions or countries. You are looking to this, you were working also from this Christian notion of the human dignity that we share. And then we need to find it back in the economy. So Tapio is indeed interested in the link, and he will have it. So basically, we have seen that this content perfectly builds on our previous webinar. And on our take on the economy as something that should serve the human dignity of all and our common environment as well. And I think that is what we should first of all take away from here, that when we talk about solidarity, we're not talking about abstracts of countries or institutions, but that we are talking about people, and that we are talking about the environment, and that we're talking about creation, and not simply about abstract entities. And your proposal is one possible way out of that, and is aiming for that goal.
And just basically using
economy. Yeah.
And basically we are using a common resource. The euro is a common resource.
Yes, totally.
So that is
that is clear
in a solidaric way. Yeah. So that's
so basically, those who still are against the euro in principle, and with something different than whether a country, yes or no, should introduce it. But when it is there, let's use it for the common good. This is basically what you're saying. Good. Now, thank you so much for all of that, and for this in-depth, extremely high quality input that we received from you, and also for your provocative new ideas, or basically actually existing ideas, but where the officials don't want to talk about.
Yeah.
This is often what you hear from many people who have been in government positions. Then suddenly, when they are out of that, then suddenly the truth is there, and they're talking about what they were actually thinking as soon as they were out of the grip of the mainstream dogmas. Now, one of the things Salox wants to do is basically to when it comes to the economy, we want to get out of these mainstream stranglehold boxes, and to present an economy that serves people. Now, coming to a close of this webinar, because it's really time now, I thank you, and I thank Tapio, Sofia, and Valentina for their contributions, and I thank everybody who watched and who asked questions, and I also thank Christian Meinen for his excellent help as my colleague, for his excellent help in the technical support for this webinar. I think that given the situation where Europe is in, this is clearly pointing out that a direction of travel towards a more humane economy that is really serving all Europeans. So thank you so much. And for those who are interested more in our work, we encourage you to go to our website, www.salox.eu, and that you can there go to our bookstore, go to our products that we already have on this, and you also can watch the previous webinar, and we invite you very much to do so. Well, thank us again, everybody, Rosen, and everybody who's been watching and contributing, and we will close it now, and we wish you all a very good summer, because also Salox will go into kind of summer recess now, and we will reopen the discussions and the debates after the summer. But of course, let's see what happens Thursday, or better said, that's already today, and tomorrow, in what the EU leaders are trying to figure out. It seems that they have not a solution yet, so probably it will be later, and hopefully there will be some people who are open for different and new ideas for a more European and European humane economy, not more European, but more humane European economy. And we would be happy to see you back after the summer break, and have a great summer. And
thank you very much.
And
thank you very much for the invitation. It was really a pleasure, Jonas.
Great. Happy to hear that. I will now push the button leave, and if there's